Chad,
Ma'am?
tell us a little bit about how this exhibition came to fruition.
I did a lot of wood carvings in undergrad, but then in graduate school, that program was set up for metal fabrication. And then it's really difficult to have two different shops. So then focused on metal fab because it was easier to get commissions that way. But then this tallest beam here, when they built the Cotton Court Hotel, they had a parking lot and they used it as a staging yard. So at the ribbon cutting, I was not there, but the next day I called the contractor and there was some leftover wood. And I was like, can I have the wood? And they said yes. And so a couple of the largest pieces in here are scrap. That really probably would have just gone in the dumpster or something. And so got some buddies, carried it. It lived in my driveway for a while. And then a couple summers ago, July of 2023, just was kind of like, I need something to do. And so I picked this one up earlier. This is number 88, but I walked this across the road from from Cass to LHUCA. And I was like, Taylor, I want to do this and more of them and also some bigger ones. And I want the main gallery. And she said yes. And so that was really insane for her to agree to. And then I just, as some of y'all know, when I would go on vacation to Alabama or Possum Kingdom or Hunt or wherever, I took the little red stand and brought a chunk of wood or two and clamped it and chiseled and carved and did it. And then just wherever I've gone in my pickup truck, I've had my pocket knife and I've had chunks of wood. And so when I sit down, I just do that. And if you do that for a year and a half, it sort of becomes this. So that's what happened.
So we were aiming for, I think 20 pieces we had decided would be good. How many pieces of large sculpture do we have in here?
From the small to the biggest, I think it's 33 or 34.
Yeah.
33, yeah. I think. And then there's 111 whittles displayed. There's more. There's another bucket. There just wasn't room.
Yeah. So we had to cull the whittles down because you said there was going to be over 100 whittles out, and Chad got over 100 whittles out. And so I was really proud of him. Talk about, so you sourced this one from the Cotton Court. Tell about the different areas, other places that you sourced the wood from.
I inherited my grandfather's wood shop in Tennessee, in Chattanooga. So a few years ago, I don't know how long ago that was, Nick Dragon and I flew to Chattanooga, rented a U-Haul, and then drove it back. So the walnut that's in the show, that's all from Grandfather Harris. And then some of the oak chunks are from Grandfather. Some of it is also stuff I had. So with some of the oak, I'm not really sure. And then Jonathan Whitfield went and was working on a cabin up in southern Colorado. So there's a chunk of aspen that he brought back for me. And then a couple of chunks of the pine is stuff that he brought back from me. And then the cedar, Julie Weaver had some in her backyard, and so she gave me some chunks. And then I had a couple more ideas, and so then I actually had to go to the store and buy some cedar. So that's just from Sutherland's. And that was painful. Wood's expensive.
Yeah, wood's expensive. So the different design elements, there are very few whittles that we've talked about that actually turned out to be, an exact replica of a sculpture. And so talk about the process, because there's a lot of round whittles, but the round, larger sculptures are more bulbous instead of donut quality, if you will, or circular quality. So talk a little bit about designing the different whittles and how the whittles became the larger sculptures.
The whittles they're not a model. They're a maquette, so they're a study. A model to me, then you can scale up 1-to-1, and these don't really scale up 1-to-1. The chunk of that doesn't perfectly go to the chunk of what I had. So making multiples and just kind of discovering things. I didn't really go into the whittles with a lot of forethought. Like, they're very relaxing. That's more of a calm, zen, maybe meditative, if you will, although I'm a little high-strung to say that. But you had this little block of wood and you go, well, what am I going to do? and you make your first cut, and then you make your second cut, and then you just keep going. And then some of them you're like, oh, well, that was terrible. But then some of them you go, oh, if I do this, and then you do the next one, you go, okay, well, that did something. And then I would get maybe a few, and then I'd go outside to the larger chunks, and I'd be like, okay, well, how does this translate to that? And then that's when it really becomes high strung, because one of the things that's not in this show at all, and I kind of made myself this rule, is nothing is glued together. All the wood is one piece of wood, so it's all subtractive method. So once it's cut away, nothing was glued back on or glued together. And that's scary when you're dealing with a chunk of wood that was your grandfather's and you don't want to ruin it. And you go, man, I want to make sure. So it's easy with the whittles to do some things, but the tools also don't perfectly relate to once you go to a larger chunk of wood. So there's chainsaw, reciprocating saw, circular saw, chisels and mallets. I do have a pneumatic chisel, so it's an air hammer style. That thing is so violent. I actually prefer the hand mallet. The other thing just shakes me to death, and it's not calming anymore. Whereas the mallet work is nice. You kind of just get yourself in a zone, and then you do it till your shoulder burns, and then you take a break, and then you come back and you do it till your shoulder burns again.
So you can see in the larger floor sculptures how your metal fabrication background actually helped play a part. And so Amanda said earlier this week, you better watch out because pretty soon you're going to become a furniture designer, and we don't want that. So, but I really enjoy this exhibition because you didn't use a single white pedestal to display artwork. And so talk about the process of building these pedestal pieces and, you know, sourcing from what you could and using your metal fabrication background.
Some of these would stand up on their own without a base, but if you looked at it, it might fall over. So just for safety, they needed something. General Steel Warehouse now has a laser cutter, and they're manufacturing components for the oil and gas industry. And so what they're doing is, you know, they sell pipe, but then you need the flange. So then they laser cut the flange. So all of these circles is the inside of a flange. So I was able to buy those at a cheaper scrap price. They're about $25 to $30 a piece still, but it's way cheaper than me trying to cut perfect circles. And then I guess I've always liked natural history museums or places that display artifacts. And so I do like that some of them kind of sit up and they become something. You can see I didn't try to carve a bear or an eagle. I don't actually know how to do that, which is why I didn't do it. And also apathy, I don't care. But some of them are reminiscent of something, or like, what was this? And there is mechanical form, and then there's organic form, and then some things that you're like, I don't quite know what that is. When we set up the show, one of the things I said is like, except for the artist statement, there's nothing going to be on the wall. I want people to walk around it. Sculpture is three-dimensional for a reason, and sometimes we sculptors get pushed to the wall because they want people to walk down a hallway. And I'm just like, no, you're going to have to walk around this today. So setting up the show, we did keep human safety in mind so that there is room, but I really did want people to meander through. Pedestals have sort of a weird art history thing with them. When you put something on a pedestal, you're making it precious. And there is something still, to me, that I wanted it to have a more casual feel to it, that this is something I made by hand. I do consider it an art object, but it is whittled wood. And so I didn't want to put it on a pedestal. And so some of them look more like tables you might see in Architectural Digest. Some of them are stools from the studio, and I just put a slab of wood on it and said here. And that was just because it's too low sitting on the floor, so I needed it to sit up higher. I don't want to be a furniture maker. I'm not good enough. A lot of these surfaces are like they're just raw wood, so they look really pretty right this. but if you were to put a coffee cup on it, you're going to stain it and make it a mess. We did say that if somebody wanted to buy one, I would try to figure out how to make it home safe, but except for maybe a couple, I don't know if they're really, whatever, safe for a house, if that makes sense.
I just like that you design these pieces in mind of displaying them at different heights, because pedestals, depending on what space you're in, can be very uniform and, take away from the object. But I feel like these pieces that you've designed along with the sculptures help elevate and tie everything in together, and it brings your two metal fabrication and wood fabrications together.
What is it? Necessity and fear is the master of ingenuity, or something like that. So yeah, at some point it was like, I just have to put something together. The little black low one over there, the little finials there, are also from my grandfather's wood shop, and they're supposed to be decorative pieces for something else. I just turned them into table legs for today, but I kind of like that a lot because they kind of look like high heels, and then there's this really chunky thing sitting on top. So I don't know, the juxtaposition, if you will, of that, I think is nice.
Yeah, well, and it's like you have these very heavy looking objects on these precious little stands on the bottom, and you're like, oh, is it gonna survive? But it is, it's gonna hold up. So
It'll survive for 2 months.
yeah, and then it's whatever after that.
After that, no promises.
Let's talk a little bit about your artist statement. You gave a really nice insight to it on Thursday night. So would you kind of reiterate that for us and tell us about your artist statement?
It was years and years ago, but it was the first time at my house at Thanksgiving I was at the head of the table. And so I knew I was going to be the one saying the prayer that day for Thanksgiving. And so that was the first time I wrote some variation of that that's on the wall. And I've also, since then, I've used it as a toast at parties. I've also just in my own brain just kind of circled back to it. And so come before last is just one word from each of the sentences. So the artist statement is 3 sentences long. And basically it's future tense, past tense, present tense. And part of it comes from those little motivational quotes that you find as you're like scrolling, and there'll be things that say like, don't focus on the past, only this moment matters, or don't think about the future, you'll only be disappointed. And so there is this thing, I think, for me, culturally, that it's like, if you're not happy in the moment, like that's the goal, only this moment matters. And you're kind of like, I don't know if I really agree with that. Like, I have amazing memories from the past that I like to think about, and friends that aren't with me anymore. But I still like to say their name. But there's also something wonderful to think about, like people that aren't even born yet that I'll get to know and look forward to that, or to make plans and go, hey, I want to go to this concert. Well, unless you buy the ticket, it's going to sell out and you can't go to the concert. Well, you may get sick and not be able to go to the concert, so you're going to be disappointed, but it's okay to look forward to something. And I guess like I think that future, past, and present matter, but disappointment happens, and I also have bad memories, and so all of it matters in human existence to me. With the work, one of the things is you do kind of have to focus. You are using a power tool or you are using a pocket knife, and it's pretty sharp, and I don't want to cut my finger. And so a lot of the mentality with the work was to go, I just want to be here. And so a lot of this work really is made in what was the present tense of, I'm here, once I make this cut, I've made that cut and I can't take it back. But I want to make the cut because I want to see what it becomes. But the focus to go hit, 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 hit. Like, I tried at different times, like to put in a podcast, but I couldn't. Like, their voices were distracting. And so it does that. It sort of centers and makes you focus whether or not you wish your brain was drifting in other places. So that's the artist statement. come before last. The artist statement, as you tell, doesn't relate to like the physical work. It's more the mentality or maybe headspace I was in as I was making the work.
I do think that the artist statement does relate to the work in more ways than just the present moment, because a lot of these pieces are from your grandpa's wood shop, and it does bring in the past and the future, because a lot of these luckily have new homes at the end of this exhibition, and it'll give you the chance to make some new work, and how that sculpture is going to impact someone 100 years from now that's either inherited it or bought it in a new way. I think it does lend to the artist statement a little bit.
Or aliens that find it in the dumpster and they're trying to figure out what it was.
Yeah,
Okay.
narration. So yeah. So what would you like people to leave here after they view your exhibition, either at First Friday, today, after an unwind? What's the goal that you would like them to take away?
I hope they walked around and engaged the work. There's one of the reasons I want people, and the way it's set up, to walk around, is that to see it from one side, you don't really understand the piece. You have to go around it. It's one of the reasons, like for any of y'all that follow me on social media, there have been very, very few photos. As I've worked on some things, you might have noticed a story and there's like a shadow. Well, that zigzag shadow was that piece over there, but I didn't really show you the piece because you had to come, you have to experience, or you really won't get it. Now, after this, I'll probably make an album, and people that can't come see it will be able to have some experience of it. But I guess one example of that is this. So this little piece here is really just, this is a geometric version of this. So this is a twist, this is a spiral, so we all get that sensibility. But this piece here, just in a different way, is doing the exact same thing, where it's turning and it's twisting. And so the largest piece here, if you just see it from one side, you don't get that, and you might have to run around pretty fast. But if you really circled it, it's a spiral. It's doing the same thing, but you don't know that unless you're actually in the room. And so I do think that art is best experienced versus flipped through in a book. But I myself have never seen the Great Pyramids, so I've only ever known them as this, unless I get to go. I have had the privilege of seeing Machu Picchu, and so that's amazing. So I do hope people go, oh man, that was a really cool sculpture show. And then I also hope they are just like, man, that was silly. That guy whittles way too much. And that's perfectly valid response as well. I think if the whole show was the whittles, I probably would be mocked. I think the size helps, but the bigs without the smalls don't make sense either.
I agree.
So,
yeah, over the past year and a half when we were talking about this exhibition, we went through several iterations of what we thought it could be. And, initially it was just going to be all down the middle. But I think once Chad got the sculptures in here, I told him how I appreciated that you could experience object in the round and see it 360. And also that the smaller ones aren't on pedestals and pushed up against the wall. You can experience the smaller sculptures as well in the round and get that full experience of the twist, even if it's not literal twist, it's more geometrical. You can, it's implied. And I think the whittles do help cement these larger than life wooden sculptures that you've been able to make. So
the smalls are supposed to be experienced in the hand. So we did make a touch table. And if we thought the general public could put everything back nicely, we would have made everything touchable. But, we were afraid they'd all start playing Jenga with them.
Yeah.
But I mean, the way, I guess for me, because I am doing a pocket knife and I twist and I turn, sometimes I'm looking at that and then I go, how big am I in this thing? Like what is the human scale of that? Human scale right now is my hand, but then, for that one there, like I'm this big, somewhere in there. So kind of that is also maybe, I don't know, changes how we think about our place in it.
Yeah. And the largest piece is 14 foot and 4 inches. We measured it the other day. So we were like, is it 14 feet? So yeah, it's 14 solid feet. So, okay. Who has questions for Chad? Yes, ma'am.
I have too many questions. Do you know when you start whether you're going to do something that's geometric or organic?
On a whittle, I typically, and then some of them, like if I've done the same thing too much, then I'll go, okay, let's do something different. But I also go to the West Winds Brass Band at Wagner Park in June. And so I'll just pick up a stick and then my pocket knife and my camping chair and then just do that. So there are some of the whittles that are in just natural raw wood versus most all of it is basswood, which then I've cut down. And then sometimes I try to give myself an assignment of like, what if we make this side mechanical and this side organic and see what happens in the middle? And those are some of the least successful ones because I'm not very good at it. I haven't figured out how to make that play yet. And then there are whittles that I would love to go big. I don't know how to do it. And so if we, I don't know. I'm at a phase right now where like this feels good and complete, and then you start going, okay, well, what's next? And so some of the things I haven't quite figured out, I go, okay, well, maybe that's what's next, is to go, you don't know how to do this yet. How do we figure out how to do that? And I do think that's why I love sculpture, and I haven't, that passion hasn't dwindled, is that I do continue to figure things out and learn. If it was just this repetitive thing and I knew the answer, I would have stopped years ago. I just would have been boring a long time ago.
Do you ever draw them before you start?
Very rarely. My sculpture professor, David Detrich at Clemson, the first time I met with him, and this is grad school, so like you're nervous on like how to, like here's some ideas in this sketchbook. He was like, oh, I never draw. He was like, if I draw it, I know what it looks like. He's like, I'm a sculptor, I build things. And I was just like, I don't have to draw? I was like, nice. Now I do make notes. I have like little bits of paper here and there. And I did doodle some out to try to go, I don't know if the weather was bad. It was like, okay, well, how would this relate? Now I do draw on the wood and, make cuts to lines. And on some of them, the Sharpie is still present because at some point, it is process-based work. I'm not a magician. Like, I'm just a guy with a circular saw. And so, like, to be able to just be like, yep, that's the line that the circular saw followed, I was like, I don't mind if the viewer sees that.
Is the difficulty in the transition from the whittle to the big piece the change to the power tool?
That's part of it. The other thing is like, so like this piece of wood is this big. The knife I normally use is like that. And so my cutting surface is that big, but then you go to a big piece and now the wood is this big and your cutting surface is that big. So the ability to make that full cut doesn't really happen. And then chainsaws are great, but they also are difficult to control. And with this biggest piece, I had it drawn out and I'm on one side with the saw, John's on the other, and I would make the cut. And then when I'd hit the mark on that side, he'd say stop. And then I'd stop because I can't see it on the other side. So there's also, this spins in my hand really easy. The bigs, when I'm chiseling on them and they're on a sawhorse, I have to clamp them down or they'll bounce off. Well, then to rotate it, you're walking to the other side, you're undoing the clamp, you're undoing the clamp, you're rotating it, you're clamping it, you're clamping it, you make some hits, unclamp, clamp, clamp, unclamp. So time consuming on some of it. So you would hit as much as you could, but then you might flip to the other side and you're like, oh, why'd I cut that piece off? And you'd be like, okay, I messed that up. Okay, well, how do we remedy that? Because I can't see it all at the same time. And money. Finance. This is cheap. It's 50 cents probably. Some of these big chunks are a few $100s a pop. And so you get to that and you're like, oh, I can't take this back. Like, I better believe this or I've just wasted money. And I don't have that financial ability to waste money.
What other questions?
So are you going to keep whittling or are you going to have to find something else to do with your hands?
I'm going to keep whittling. I am not going to as fervently whittle. Like at some point I was like, this is starting to become insane. And
That's what I was asking.
yeah, do not put me in the crazy house because they don't let you have sharp objects. I'll keep going. I'll keep going. I basically used every big chunk of wood I had. And so at this point, to make new stuff is me figuring out how to source it. And so I do thank everybody that bought a piece because I probably will just waste it on more wood. My
Fueling
bad.
his habit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Statement you made a little while ago about what you do share on social media. And of course, because you're Chad, you like what you said, like almost applies to all of social media, that you can put a photo of somebody, but it's different from like talking, getting to know, getting all their sides. So that was, of course, you just threw that out there. Super prophetic with all of social media. But question is, you were talking just now about how you'll rotate it, do those cuts, and keep having to step around. How often in that process are you actually placing the piece upright to get that perspective, what it will look like walking around?
On some of them fairly often. On this largest piece, I never saw it vertical till we moved it in. It took 4 guys and Taylor to stand it up, and I just didn't always have that. And so I carved that in my driveway on sawhorses, and I just sort of knew what it was going to be. I was like, it's going to do this. I know it's going to work, I think. But until we put it up, I didn't know. But then on some, I did try to keep myself disciplined because I am incredibly lazy. If a piece was on the sawhorse, I worked it start to finish. Because what can happen is you do the fun part and then you don't want to finish it up and you put it to the side and you're like, I'll get back to that later. And I'm not great at getting back to it later. And so to go, you started this, you have to finish it before you move on to the next one, even though you're more excited about the next one. And so I had to do that just because I know my mind. But there were times I would stand one up and be like, I just want to live with that for a minute. And I did give my permission to maybe start another one while I lived with that one. This one to my left, that's not what it started as. It was bigger and it just wasn't right. I had a whittle that looked cool and I tried to duplicate it and it just did not work. And so I just kept making it shrink and shrink and shrink. It is one of the ones that will not sell. It is weird. It is strange, which is also why I love it at the front door because it sets the mood of like, this is odd. And then some other things are like, oh, well, that makes a little more sense. But that one's still a strange little guy.
Is it a big adjustment going from different types of wood?
Yeah.
So if you try to stay with the type,
I didn't, but I mean, they all behave very differently. Some of the pine is so soft that no matter how sharp your chisel is, it tears. And it doesn't just cut, but it's ripping it, which I don't love that texture, but I don't have a great way to overcome that. The chunks of pine that John brought me from Colorado, it was aged, so it wasn't just totally fresh cut, but it really cut well. Those were fun days. The complexity of those pieces aren't any more complex than others, but I did those fast just because it cut so smooth. The black walnut is hard. I mean, I burned up some saw blades just pushing through it, which is also why I don't want to be a furniture maker because I'm like, I don't actually have good enough tools to do anything with this. It is that dense. That was in grandfather's shop for probably 40 years. I mean, so it is cured.
What other questions do we have?
Did you do any finishing of the grain, or were all these pieces wood? Was the color and stain the way it was when you started?
It is either raw wood or I torched it. And then with some of them with the torch, it's just left. Some of them I torched and wire brushed. And then so it doesn't just totally flake off on you, did some spray like clear polyurethane just so it's not, but I didn't do multiple coats so that it's building, it's just sort of holding it in place. And then there's a little bit of paste wax on some of the wood just to give it a little bit of something, but there is no like colorant stain. That I'm not opposed to, but it opens up this whole other can of worms that I was just like, I don't want to take the time to figure all that out, to mix it, to do color tests and this and that. Even though I worked 1.5 years on this, which sounds like a lot of time, I have a full-time job and a part-time job and kids and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I was just like, no, just do that, which is also a reason I didn't join any boards together. There were times at the studio where I'd have a piece and I would stack one on top of it just to get it out of the way. I'd be like, oh, that's really rad. You could join those together. And it was like, no, you can't. Because if I open up that, then I go down a rabbit hole that I'm just like, no, single objects, single chunk.
So the beam is torched.
That's torched. And that is not wire brushed. Like if you touched it, you will have a black hand.
Yep.
Some of them, if you, yeah. Some of them, if you touch and it's black, you won't get a black hand, but if you really rubbed it, it would start to come off. So with some of them that have been purchased, I probably will have to kind of just do a little light coat before I pass it on to the new owner.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Would you like to see them indoors or outdoors? Or in a covered area?
The second largest one, which has sold, is going to some friends of mine, and they bought a new house and they have a pool, and it's going to go next to the pool in a little gravel area, and they need to plant some agave next to it, and that is going to be beautiful, and I think that's awesome. Some of the small ones I think would look great on a hearth or, you know, a shelf above the fireplace or on a end table. So inside is fine with me. I like what happens over time with them being outside and aging, but a lot of people like the surface and then like seeing the contrast to the cut. And if it's outside, that's all going to become the same at some point. So it won't be able to be controlled. So I also have the attitude that once somebody buys it, it's theirs. A friend of mine bought one of the Whittles the other day, and she was like, would you mind if I turn this to a necklace pendant? And I was like, no, like, when you own it, you own it. Like you do. So yeah, turn it over, let it be.
Any other questions? Chad does have a whittling workshop coming up. I think we have a few slates left, and all the proceeds from that benefit our summer camp. So I'm really excited about that. And then we have a few more events coming up, Unwind this month and next month, and then First Friday next month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Chad. I'm really proud of you, my friend. And
Thank you.
I'm really excited for this to be my first large sculpture exhibition in this gallery. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, y'all.